sophisticated to many unbelievers.
Evidently, it's a Trusty Ape live stream on Friday morning. Hello. So, kind of ironic turn of events since the last time we've been together. I have learned that one of my offspring is now a Christian TikToker. Okay, so not super controversial content. It's a lot of kind of new agey, hippie Christian stuff, not apologetics or anything like that, just, life is better with Jesus and, a lot of normal teenage girl stuff. But I found it interesting, and she felt so compelled to start a TikTok, which, I'm not sure the average ratio of, channel growth and TikTok followers is. She has more subs on her TikTok channel than I have here, for instance. And so, okay, interesting. Good morning, my awesome life. Good to see you. I contended with the idea of being in the circles that I am in, knowing that inevitably she might make a video and somebody that I know and follow in the YouTube community might eventually cover that content. It's big right now. It's big. It's blowing up. YouTube covers TikTok, etc. type of stuff, hashtag trending. And so I was like, is there something I ought to do about this, or just leave it alone? It's quite a conundrum. I respect her decision. As far as I can tell, like I said, most of it's like positive, uplifting content and all of that. But I just know how this internet thing works, and the potential for scrutiny and trolls, people that fuck with you. So it makes me concerned, but it is what it is.
After all, in our natural human experience, often messages get garbled or distorted or augmented in the process of being passed from one person to another, right? We've all lived in nice big families where a message goes from one hand to another, and by the time you get it, it's not really in its pure form. So we say, since we've seen...
He's talking about the game of telephone. Yeah. Messages get distorted after they're passed through several interpreters.
That happen in our natural experience, we should just take for granted that that's got to be true about the Bible as well. To unbelievers who reason this way, we mustn't tire of pointing out that they are relying upon conjecture and not upon research in what they are saying. Now, it may seem likely that the biblical text would no longer be reliable, no longer be authentic after all these years. But the likelihood, that judgment of likelihood, is an evaluation that rests upon presuppositions that are arbitrary, presuppositions that are nothing more but prejudice. Let's see if we can see the prejudice in this line of reasoning. If you're sitting there thinking, well, yeah, what do you say to that? That seems so reasonable. So you should be asking the unbeliever, What's the basis for your saying that? The first prejudice is the assumption that the biblical text is no different from any other written document, which we find in our natural human experience throughout history.
That's not a prejudice. Like, how is that not a reasonable presupposition? Like, why would I presuppose that this particular document is any more important than any other document that I might, like, out of all of the texts, just say this one holds more gravity? That's why.
Notice how I sucked you into this. I said, we all know what it's like to live in a home where a message is passed from one person to another and it doesn't turn out to be accurate. It's distorted by the time a person finally gets it. What is it? I mean, I didn't put a red flag out there to say, watch out now. And this is what the unbeliever is going to do to you, not by malice, although sometimes, but the unbeliever doesn't realize he or she's doing this too. You notice what the prejudice is there? The prejudice is this book is like what? Any other book. This message passed down through the ages is like any other message passed down through the ages. But what if it happens to be a unique message? What if it happens to have a unique authority? What if it happens to have the absolute personal, all-providential, all-controlling, all-knowing God behind it? You see, if that is true, then you can't treat it like any other kind of message, can you? To assume that, in my experience, all other messages tend to be corrupted when they're passed from one person to another, therefore it's true of this book as well, is to say this book's like no other book. I mean,
Well, it is demonstrably true of the Bible because there are so many biblical scholars who disagree on, just everything with it, like how to be saved, whether the Genesis is literal or figurative, like just all of these various details, like crazy.
Exactly like the other books, rather than being a unique book in my experience. If the Bible is, as it claims to be, the inspired word of Almighty God, then the history of its textual transmission may very well be quite different from other human documents, since God would have ordained that its text be preserved with greater integrity than
With greater integrity. The Christian Carpenter, good morning. Good to see you as well.
that of ordinary books. Okay, so that's the first indication of prejudice, and that was unargued, right? The unbeliever didn't come in and say, now the book is not, as it claims to be, a unique book under the providential care of God. The second indication of prejudice is that the unbeliever does not offer any concrete evidence that some medieval monk tampered with the text before us today. When unbelievers say things like that, the remark is simply and arbitrarily advanced as a hypothesis to be endorsed for its likelihood, given your assumptions and prejudices, rather than endorsed because of its empirical credentials. If we want to play that way, of course, we could, with equal arbitrariness, conjecture that the words which came down to us as Paul's were actually written not years later than Paul, but were written years before the time of Paul. Arbitrariness is a fickle friend to the scholar. Cut loose from any demand for evidence, we could believe any number of conflicting things. The point here is the unbeliever has thought he or she could just say, well, it just seems like common sense to me, and arbitrarily say that. Thirdly, as an indication of prejudice,
I gotta be honest, he kind of lost me there with the whole without evidence, we could believe any number of, contradictory, absurd, which is what he does. Okay.
This criticism, we see that the unbeliever has not taken account of the actual evidence which is publicly available regarding the text of Scripture.
Right. The Bible as evidence, got that part. But the problem, again, circular reasoning, the Bible's true because the Bible says the Bible is true, right? Even though other historical accounts conflict, like the Battle of Jericho, like the flood accounts, like there's just all kinds of stuff that doesn't actually make sense in there.
My second criticism was they didn't think they needed evidence at all. My third criticism, or indication of prejudice, is that there is a great deal of evidence there, and they haven't bothered to even look at it. If the critic had taken time to look into the subject, he or she would not have offered the outlandish evaluation of the biblical text as being unreliable. This fact came home to me with great...
Oh yeah, so we got our first official copyright strike. Actually, no, this will be the second one. Regarding fair use for the Gavin Newsom video that I did here a while, a week or so back. So I actually appealed this one. I put this one up for appeal, and they should be getting back to me, I think, by today or tomorrow on that copyright claim for critiquing the Gavin Newsom interview. So yeah, it was the publishing company, and they put the copyright on me, and I actually appealed it under fair use, and there's now a fair use disclaimer in the description, but I thought that was obviously bullshit because, like, if you watch any portion of the video, I am clearly commenting on the video, and I do it frequently here. And hey, Mikey, good to see you. Mikey Suits 4. You know about terms of service and fair use. But, sometimes these people still, or it's the AI, they just put bogus claims against you, and you have to go refute them.
Strength or force after I took an advanced course in graduate school on the philosophy of Plato. In this course, we were required to do textual criticism of the literary corpus of Plato's works. So let me just, I know you're not fascinated by Plato necessarily, but let me use it.
There's either, I'm not sure if it's there's somebody that's very sick in this classroom and ought to leave, but this is clearly a pre-pandemic, no masks here. But that guy just, does he know they're filming? Cover your cough, bro. Yeah, I do, unfortunately. Yeah, they get all of us from time to time.
This is an illustration for you. Our earliest known manuscript, our earliest extant manuscript of a work by Plato dates from right before 900 AD. It's the manuscript known as Oxford B, and it was found in a Patmos monastery by E.B. Clarke. Now you have to remember that Plato is thought to have written these manuscripts roughly...
That dancing monkey's cracking you up. Yeah, I didn't know if it was a little too much, but I figured I'd try to get a new... I got the old dancing monkey gift too, but I decided to use this one instead, so I thought it was... There's a few... Well, I'll show you guys next time. I'll bring one of them up, actually, now that I think about it, because there's some good ones I found.
350 years before Christ. And the first copy we have of these manuscripts written 350 years before Christ dates from 900, or just before 900 AD. And so there you have a gap between the original writing and the earliest document we have as a copy of 1,200 years. By contrast, the earliest fragments of the New Testament date less than 50 years after the original writing, the earliest fragments. The bulk of our important extant manuscripts date from 200 to 300 years after the original composition.
So here he is just acknowledging that none of it was recorded contemporaneously, right? Because they can't claim that, and be, honest. So, okay. But he's like, okay, I don't know, 200 years, whatever, there's no loss of information or distortion of information there, playing a game of telephone.
The text of the New Testament which we have is remarkably uniform and well established. And the reliability of the Old Testament text has been demonstrated to the surprise of scholars by the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls. Now, I'm not going
to... highly contested. Highly contested. I think by the Catholic Church. Trying to open up the YouTube chat here. Mikey Seuss4 says, the knowledge makes me feel more trapped by the YT overlords. Censorship is a double standard by all streaming services. No one is exempt. Ooh, and then it disappeared. Spooky. Hello, Christian. God bless you, brother. Gorilla Censored Thoughts should see this monkey go. Yeah. And, you know, I mean, my avatar technically is gorilla-like. We went, you know, there was a process of getting this image correct because I was like, I don't want it to look too much like a chimp. But, you know, I don't want it to be hunched over either. So it has to be, because, you know, anyway. There's a whole, like, you know, technical shit going on there with different primate species and all of that, but I'm not getting into it.
Get into a lot of detail here, but it's a fascinating field if you want to pursue it more. Some estimates given by scholars who have studied painstakingly the different manuscripts of the New Testament and the testimony that we have from literary evidence leads them to conclude that the text of the New Testament has been established with certainty in about 98% of the cases of the words and lines of the New Testament. Now then.
What is that? What is he talking about? That the text has been established with certainty in 98% of what?
The New Testament has been established with certainty in about 98% of the cases of the words and lines of the New Testament.
So by Bonson's account, like 2% of the New Testament might be false? I mean, but like even by this account, I guess, which like where? Well, obviously this is older, right? The Jericho thing, I think that was a newer debunk done by archaeology, where they're like, no, there's no way this account is factual. You know, as a matter of like, you know, all of the any records, you know, of the place, you know, they excavated it and all of that. They were like, nope, didn't happen.
Now then, we have a person who says, how can you be sure what the Bible says? Maybe some medieval monk wrote all this stuff. Well, we know that a medieval monk didn't make any of this stuff up. Or in those outlandish cases where we have a medieval monk altering the text in some fabulous way, that's not in our current Bibles just because...
He's like, we know that it didn't happen, but it did happen, but they edited it back out. But just so you know, it actually did happen. There was a medieval monk who did that. Mikey Seuss4 says, some Californians have called him Gavin Newscomb. Yeah. I definitely think there were some beneficial policies he had. Like, really, there's only so much one can do in those positions, right? Like the governor of any given state only has so much actual power. So, you know, the expectations of people are sometimes unrealistic. I like most of his policies. You know, I think I said the last time when I was covering him, I was like, I'm not going to vote for this guy again, based on the fact that he was, you know, kind of doing this off-the-cuff interview with a, you know, dirty right-winger. And I was like, oh, that's icky to me. But then, you know, when I really think about it, like, you know, most of his policies have been effectual. Anything that he directly has his hands in, you know, we haven't felt, I mean, so I want to say, like, the economy in California has been pretty unshaken. Like, since the first Trump presidency, things have been fairly consistent. Like, and some things are consistently high, and I don't like that. But, you know, the inflation that everybody else is talking about in other states is just like bringing it to California level. And because of the economy we already have, right, like, so our minimum wage is already higher. In certain cities, they have, you know, their own, like, union labor laws and shit like that. So, you know, in San Francisco, for example, like, if you work there, you're required a certain minimum wage, significantly higher than the federal. So, we get by in that respect. I'm not gonna say it's not hard. It's definitely hard to live in California, but most people make ends meet. We do have a lot of homeless on the streets, and there's a lot more resources now going into assisting those people. And I see that. I work with them in real time. I've worked with these organizations. I work with the homeless directly, and I know that there are significant efforts being made to alleviate that concern, and they are effective. So, all this hype where just nothing's being done and we're just dumping money into it is not true, right? There are a lot of alternative programs going on. Even the people who are on the street, in some cases, the community is pouring resources into assisting in regulating those areas, protecting people where they can camp and be in a safe environment and still have resources and access to those things, right? So we are putting the money in those areas, and it is addressing the problem. Now, if that's going to be a long-term solution or short-term solution, I guess is the question here. But we can't really know. We just have to kind of let things play out and keep doing what we're doing, right? But it hasn't really affected me as a worker. Like, my circumstances aren't significantly affected by that, right? So as just like a normal citizen and a worker and a member of the community, my situation isn't greatly impacted by any of this. I just get to kind of work with the people and see the outcomes, and so far it's positive.
We have so much manuscript evidence that shows that doesn't belong there. The overall authenticity and accuracy of the biblical text is well known to scholars.
I think that's disputed. Is it true that homeless outnumber working citizens 4-1? Not as far as I'm aware. No, that number sounds greatly exaggerated to me. So let's see if we can find a factoid here. What does the great Google say? Yeah, less than 0.50%. So that's less than 1%, significantly less than 1%. But we have, a high population of people, so that's still like almost 200,000 people, right? So that's the problem. Seems like a lot of people, but it's not relatively to the population. Yeah.
Frederick Kenyon concluded, and let me give you a quote: "The Christian can take the whole Bible in his hand and say without fear or hesitation that he holds in it the true Word of God, handed down without essential loss from generation to generation throughout the centuries. And those kinds of assessments from competent scholars could be easily multiplied." And so when somebody says, well, you can't be sure that you really got the text of the New Testament, you need to point out to them that they're engaging in prejudice. They're not reasoning here. They're just being arbitrary. They're being arbitrary because, in the first place, they've assumed without argument that the Bible's not what it claims to be. A unique text, divinely inspired and providentially preserved. They have not bothered to look at the evidence. They're not.
I guess, upon reflection, I was thinking about that for a second, Mikey, and it didn't actually address your question, which is how many people are employed in California. I think we can infer that, significantly, so that's, less than half of 1% of the population. So probably more than half of the population is employed, right? Even if we say it's 50% of the population, I mean, there's no, we can just kind of infer that all those people aren't living off of the system, you know what I mean?
This is completely spun out of their imagination. And thirdly, the evidence that we do have would not lead to the conclusion or the radical skepticism that they are proposing. Many times, unbelievers are just so hostile to the Christian faith that they're willing to propose anything for argument's sake, even though they haven't got a shred of evidence to support it. I've even heard...
It's not the Christian faith itself, but certain denominations, certain ideologies held by Christians that people are hostile towards, like anti-LGBTQ agenda and stuff like that. All of those things make people hostile towards certain Christian ideologies, right? And we don't have to believe it. The onus would be on the believers to justify that. Hey, big love, William Freeman, and hello, Viking Silverwolf, good to see you.
Some people mouth the radical opinion. We don't have any literary historical basis for believing that.
And this is so typical of Christians, though. They have to claim that they are the victims, right? They're the ones being persecuted. By rejection of their faith, we are persecuting them, right? And we are persecuting God. We are stepping on God's wee little toes, and he is none too happy about it, Like, no, I don't think that guy exists. He's like, ow, you hurt me, bro. Now I'm going to punish you.
Jesus of Nazareth actually ever lived. We don't. What is the New Testament, for crying out loud, if it's not literary evidence of the life of Jesus? Well, but of course...
It's a story about the supposed life of Jesus, allegedly. It's not historically verified, but that's what they say it is.
At that,
is this sounds like what? Oh yeah, it's Bonson. Can you guys not see the video? Shit, I didn't check. Hold on. I tilt my screen. Nobody told me. You guys gotta tell me shit like this in the chat, man. It's all your fault.
The unbeliever wants to say, but I don't want to accept the New Testament. You say, oh yeah, that's the very thing that we're arguing about, right? And so the unbeliever is begging the question, showing his or her prejudice as much as I'm showing my pre-commitment to the New Testament. People sometimes think they can...
Viking Silverwolf said, I was able to see the vid. Freeman says, I've never seen Greg Bonson before. Yeah, this is one of his lectures. Oh, yeah. Somebody, I'm trying to remember who now. A streamer was using his image for a while as their avatar. And everybody was like, oh, is that really person X? And they were like, no, that's Bonson. And I had never heard any of his lectures, so I went and I looked up some of his lectures. Oh, yeah, it was JG. Yeah, that's right. Okay.
Just openly dismiss the Bible as a source of historical information, which is, as a matter of fact, contrary to the general practice even of unbelieving historians of the ancient world.
JG worships Bonson? Well, that would be idolatry, sir.
Unbelieving historians have learned better than to just ignore completely. Now, I'm not talking about people being willing to accept every jot and tittle of the Bible. What I'm saying is the general attitude of scholarship is not to say the Bible gives us no evidence. There are some people, and they are very, very few, who will say, well, the New Testament is there, and it does talk about a man, Jesus of Nazareth. But it may well be that there was no such person, Jesus of Nazareth. This was just made up later as a way of accounting for the origin of the Christian church. Well, after all, the Romans made up a story of Romulus and Remus to account for the founding of the city of Rome. Why can't we just put the Bible in the same category? Well, how about this? If there's an 800-year gap between the founding of Rome and the first stories of Romulus and Remus, if I have the numbers right.
Does the Bible account for the fact. Well, it probably accounts for the foundation of many communities, I guess. But how many of them are historically accurate? Like, is it? Because there are certain parts where, like, oh yeah, that jives with actual history, but there are other parts where it's like clearly not. So, I mean, that is consistent with any work of historical fiction that you find out there, or mythology, right? Like, those two are interchangeable.
And there is no such gap in terms of the life of Jesus and the founding of the church. Jesus is said to have been born about 30 to 33 years before the founding of the church. You don't have an analogy there at all. If there was no Jesus of Nazareth, and the church, as we know, came about in the 30s or 40s of the first century, how do you account for the fact that no one stood up and said, what do you mean Jesus of Nazareth? There's no Jesus.
Equivocating the fact that we know that the Romans post hoc created a mythology to solidify their power, right? And legitimize their existing power, and we know that now, right? So that's a hoax. Like, by definition, that's a hoax. And now you're like, well, they wrote the Bible story, and then they founded the church. So duh, bro. It's like, no, they could still write that post hoc to legitimize the power that they already held. You're not, like, what are you talking about?
Anywhere, you guys are making this up. The presence of hostile critics of Christianity in the days of the founding of the church makes preposterous the claim that the church came about and just made up a story about Jesus to account for its founding. Moreover, there's the evidence of secular historians, like the Roman historian Tacitus, who refers to one whose name was Christus, who he says suffered the extreme penalty at the hands of one of our procurators, Pontius Pilate. Christus suffered at the hands of Pontius Pilate. That's a Roman historian who says that. Granted, he doesn't give us a lot of information. I'm not trying to, do a complete life of Jesus from this, but to say that Christians just made this up is ignorant, prejudicial conjecture. There was a time when critics of the Old Testament ridiculed the Old Testament for mentioning a tribe of people known as the Hittites. At that time, the Hittites were not known outside the Bible. The Bible was the only literary source, the only basis for believing in the Hittites. And since it was the only one, those who were critical of the Bible were quick to say, obviously this was made up. Until Carchemish was discovered by archaeologists in the year 1871. And now in the last 100 plus years, the Hittites have come to be the best known and studied ancient people outside of the Jews. It's just incredible. Archaeology has over and over again proved to be the enemy of the biblical critics, because what it unearths is their own prejudices. Over and over again, what it confirms is the accuracy of the historical particulars of the Bible.
Once again, he's blatantly wrong, right? Because, like, aside from everything else, there are civilizations documented that existed during the supposed flood times, under any, like, reasonable timeline of the earth, right? So you got that, and then they disproved Jericho. They disproved any accounts of the Hebrew slaves in Egypt, right? The Exodus, all bullshit, right? Archaeology dispels all, and then they're like, but it proves this over here, this some random historical event. It's like, okay, they recorded that one accurately, good job. But, like, the major events that happen in the Bible, disproven, right? Not real. So, if you just redirect to this, some random occurrence they got recorded accurately, like, cool, bro. But everything else, no go.
H.M. Orlinsky wrote, more and more the older view that the biblical data were suspect and even likely to be false unless corroborated by extra biblical facts is giving way to one which holds that by and large the biblical accounts are more likely to be true than false. Now, I'm not talking about an attitude that matches what we would say. I mean, it's more likely true than false is certainly not Christian commitment, is it? But on the other hand, when an unbeliever says, oh, well, historians don't take the Bible seriously, I'm saying, you haven't read the historians, have you? Even they are saying it's more likely to be true than it is false. Think about an unsympathetic umpire like Time magazine. In an article written in 1976,
Not sure how old this original video is. Let's see if no, I don't want the transcript. What the fucking description? That is the description. So it was uploaded 2016, but the video itself looks much older, actually.
How True is the
I would judge
Bible?
Late 80s, early 90s.
The article says, after more than 2 centuries of facing the heaviest scientific guns that could be brought to bear, the Bible has survived and is perhaps better for the siege. Even on the critic's own terms, historical fact, the scriptures seem more acceptable now than they did when the rationalists began the attack. End of quote. Now, all I'm getting at here, very simply, is that when you're defending the faith and unbelievers start throwing out, these...
Dude, I mean, seriously, they're filming this thing, and this dude has been coughing all throughout, and I find it kind of funny. But I would just say, if you're like the film crew, would you like not maybe ask this guy to leave? It's like 20 minutes in, and we've heard this guy cough like probably 16 times at least. I don't know.
Opinions, you need to capture them, and they're being opinionated. When they start just spinning out from the web of their imagination, what common sense would seem to say.
Maybe it's the cameraman. The cameraman has the cough, and that's why they're not throwing him out. That would be interesting.
You need to say, you're just spinning that out of your imagination. You haven't really studied this, have you? And you may not say it in the tone of voice that's cutting, as I am right now, but you need to say, you really don't know what you're talking about. The biblical text is not something to be embarrassed about. Historical facts, archaeological confirmation, not something to be embarrassed about. Let's contrast 2 things here. I am not saying we have evidence for every bit of the biblical text. We have evidence from archaeology or history for every claim made in the Bible. That's not the point. The point is when someone says, well, we can be real flippant and not regard the biblical text or not take the history that's recounted in the Bible seriously, and say, well, that's just not what's...
What? Something's going on here. Hopefully did not anyone fuck with my chip. Fuck with my chip. Nobody fuck with that person. I'm not saying anybody is, but if they are, then don't. Anyway, I don't know what this is, but onward and upward.
So I found this to be really interesting. Pantheism, Jainism, non-theistic religions, Hinduism, and a host of other types of beliefs that does not involve a supernatural God. And this only took me literally just a few seconds to find. Why is this significant? Atheists claim that the definition of God is a supernatural, powerful, all-knowing being. Obviously, when they're talking about God, they're talking about either the Abrahamic faiths or they're talking about the God of Abraham.
It doesn't even matter if you're talking about, I mean, even if you don't include the triomni proposition, right, you would still be talking about some type of super powerful, benevolent being, like regardless of what type of God you're talking about, right? So any of those are non-evident. There's no evidence of any of those outside of mythology.
Jacob, they're talking about the God that you and I worship as Christians. But in order to be an atheist, you can't just reject one God. You have to reject them all. And there are non-supernatural gods that are indifferent.
But in order to be a devout theist, you have to accept one supernatural claim while rejecting a multitude of others simultaneously.
Religions that these people not only say nothing about, but some of them actually embrace. You're going to find some of them that are Buddhist, some of them that are pantheists, some of them that are theistic or whatever. The fact of the matter is they're being hypocritical in what they believe. Atheism is not a
We're conflating atheists with agnostics again, G-Man.
thing. These people are really misotheists pretending to be atheists.
Misotheists. You heard it again first here. I've never heard that claim before. Never heard anybody say that at all. Just brand new, out of the blue.
Well, seriously, and said, well, that's just not what scholars have learned. And so where is this coming from if it's not really based on scholarship? It's coming from prejudicial conjecture. It's arbitrariness. It's an opinion which may be desirable to the unbeliever, may be useful for preserving the unbeliever's autonomy and hatred of the Bible, but it isn't argumentation. It isn't reasoning, and you need to, as I said, probably 80% of the time that you're doing apologetics, just keep pointing that out. When I debated Edward Tabish at UC Davis, he spent a good deal of his time in his positive
UC Davis, California represent.
presentations in the debate ridiculing the Christian doctrine of hell. He found it preposterous that God would have a barbecue pit for those who would not pray in the right way. And he comes from a Jewish background. I think that's a reference to not praying in Jesus' name. And so
That was kind of funny. A barbecue pit.
on and on and on he went. And of course, many of the people in the audience loved that.
So, I'm not sure what happened here. I'm ignorant. So allegedly, somebody, or something, I don't know what happened. But my awesome wife, appeared to be timed out from the chat for some reason. I don't know. That's Deep Converted Man was live about an hour ago. And so yeah, I found out that my kid was a Christian TikToker and immediately got all kinds of mixed feels. And I was like, well, just let her do her thing, and address it if anything comes of it. There's nothing deeply concerning on there. But, the fact that, I never really got a chance to have this conversation with my child in depth to discuss it, right? And she kind of asked me out of the blue, one of the last visits that we had several years ago, why don't you believe in God? She already knew I was an atheist. She said, why don't you believe in God? And I didn't really have, a great response for that. And so another kid the other day asked me, do you believe in God? And I was like, no, not really, but we probably shouldn't discuss that. And, it's hard to try to prepare yourself for that conversation with a very young person and not try to influence them adversely, right? If they already have exposure to the church, right? Because that could be perceived negatively, right? But it's not about the perception, really. It is about the outcome. Hey, Brojo, good to see you. See Brojo over there. Like, people's perception of the thing doesn't actually matter, because then you see the actual outcomes. And I was watching a great exchange on Truth Wanted. Apparently, Objectively Dan had the skeptic on with a person called, oh, I lost my screen, Amanda, a trans woman called Amanda Bonanza. And they were really digging into this Canadian guy who was very anti-trans. And one of the things they kept pointing out was, like, he couldn't define when they asked him, like, excuse me, they asked him how he knew that he was a man, and he couldn't answer that question. He was, like, at a loss for words. He started getting very defensive. And, I thought that was, like, a very interesting exchange, because it's true that, like, if you push back on these ideas, right, you'll get people who are in such a way that they are attached to their identity. And anything, any idea, right, that makes them question that puts them in a position where they have to recoil. So you have to say, hey, that challenges this thing that I believe. So it introduces a presupposition, right? That challenges one's pre-existing beliefs about the world and the way things work. And then it makes them feel as if they are delegitimized as people, right? My identity is somehow threatened because of your identity, which is a false statement, right? And it's I think this goes back to scarcity. You see, there's a scarcity of resources. There's a scarcity of space, right? And these people say that there is a scarcity of culture, right? There can only be so much culture that exists that encompasses or that incorporates, my belief system before it cancels out your belief system, right? And that's a issue of scarcity. They believe. Now, it doesn't have to be true. It just means that people believe it. And because they believe it, they're going to make decisions like this based on that concept that if this person exists, it will cancel them out.
Snap your W-2 and file your taxes 100% free. Plus, get your biggest refund.
In a convenient capsule you can take anywhere. No additives, no fillers, no synthetics or added sugar, just pure fruits and vegetables in every capsule.
Hello, everybody. As some of you may know, and some of you don't, Canada suddenly has a new Prime Minister. His name is Mark J. Carney, and he's the replacement for Justin Trudeau, running the Liberal Party in Canada.
I did not know any of this until I watched this video, so that was interesting. And I'm like, okay, should I research this guy? Should I trust Jordan B. Peterson? I don't know.
That means that we Canadians need to know who Mark Carney is, and to the degree that Canada has a role to play internationally, that everybody needs to know. So, if you want to know who Canada...
So to be fair, I had watched this video partially, and then as I was in the middle of that, I saw the Ben podcast. Mikey Famine and folks were over there actively reviewing the video already, and I was like, fuck. So that was pretty funny. If you don't know, check out the Ben podcast. It was pretty hilarious.
His new prime minister is, and you want to know who Mark J. Carney is, and whether or not you should support him or vote for him if you're Canadian, or what you should think of him if you're part of the international audience, then this is the podcast for you. Carney is a mystery to Canadians in large part, not least because he's been a political figure for a very short period of time. And the election that's being called is a snap election, so Canadians aren't going to have, and the rest of the world aren't going to have a lot of time to get to know him before the determination of his status as Prime Minister is going to be finalized. Now, I want to make a case for Carney first, as powerfully as I can, so that we give the devil its due.
Do hit the like button and all that good stuff.
So to speak, and I think the right way to do that is with a review of his resume. It's quite clear to me that Canadians are entranced with Carney, whose Liberal Party has risen dramatically in the polls in the last month. They're entranced with him for two reasons. And one is because Trump has been careening around like a bull in the china shop with regards to his comments about Canada, placing tariffs on Canada, and describing us as not worthy of having our own country, and fated, if we're lucky, to become the 51st state. This has produced a groundswell of pro-Canadian sentiment. In consequence, even among Liberals who haven't been noted for their patriotism over the last 10 years. This is a common occurrence in Canada historically. It's very frequently the case that in Canada we learn to pull together because of a threat, real or supposed, emanating from the American elephant that occupies the place of primacy south of us. So Carney has got, and the Liberals have got a boost because of
yeah, okay, he was referencing
Trump's rampaging around, but also because Carney is a new face and a new fresh face, and so hypothetically, and so the people who are a little leery, let's say, of the conservatives.
You just say hypothetically? I mean, obviously in the political sphere that is the case. So,
Under Poilievre have every reason to hope that Carney is the right man for the time. Now, he's capitalized on that to some degree by positioning himself as an outsider who will bring fresh new ideas and a novel and innovative approach to the Canadian political situation. And we'll take that claim apart a little bit later. Suffice it to say that the combination of his novelty and the knockoff consequences of Trump's comments with regard to Canada have moved the Liberals over the last month from a place where they were essentially facing electoral...
So basically, like, Canada is, reacting to the right-wing push in North America, right, in the USA, and they feel very threatened. You know, this already extremely marginalized Canadian right wing, they feel threatened. Well, that's, to be expected, I guess. I mean,
of a historically unprecedented sort.
Like, the whole history of Canada is we are the nice liberal guys, right? Like, pretty much. Like, as far as we Americans know, that's all we know about you guys. Like, you're gay, you're a pushover, all of this stuff, right? Extremely liberal. So the right wing has to be an extreme fringe group in Canada, and this guy happens to be part of it. They're kind of coming back, but not really. Projo said, Mr. Jordan, I can't get to the point in less than 5 minutes without word salad.
To neck and neck, or arguably in the lead of Pierre Poilievre's Conservatives. And so why have Canadians turned to Carney apart from Trump? Well, Carney has a remarkable resume. And if the choice is Carney or Pierre Poilievre, it would be easy for Canadians to assume that Carney has everything that Poilievre does and more. Poilievre's a career politician, and that means he's faced the electorate. It means he's done a lot of door-to-door knocking. It means he's listened to Canadians at the ground level and been appraised of their concerns. And Carney doesn't have that, but Poilievre is also a career politician. Now, Carney is a career bureaucrat, and he has a resume that, on the face of it, you might be regarded as preferable in its depth to Poilievre's. So I want to familiarize you with his resume, and then I want to walk you through what it signifies, because we should.
It's like everything he says. Okay, so he's gonna walk us through. I'm trying to imitate his gesturing here, but he's gonna walk us through the guy's resume and what it signifies. Okay,
assess not only what he's done and what he looks like on
I sped this fucking video up.
paper, but what that
We
actually
could do 4.5, or I'm sorry, 1.5. I was thinking about one thing.
means, practically and conceptually speaking, and with regards to its impact on Canada and the broader world. So we're going to start by walking through his resume. So currently, as we already pointed out, he's Prime Minister of Canada, and that's been the case since March 14th. Now, here's a couple of things to understand about that. The first is that he's Prime Minister and he holds no seat in the House of Commons, which means he hasn't faced any electorate. He does not have a mandate from the Canadian people. And about 130,000 Liberals voted for him. So he's basically become Prime Minister with no test of the validity of his personality or his political stance being presented to Canada by a tiny proportion of the Canadian population.
Is that unprecedented? Is that not the way that that things work in Canada? I don't know. I don't know anything about Canadian politics.
About half of one.
To be honest. So, like, I don't know if that's normal, but obviously, you know, Donald Trump, he's never been in the military. He's never been in, you know, the outside of, you know, being in business. He has no credential for the presidency, right? So there's no test, right? And they say that there's no religious test or test of, right? It's like purely, I guess that's in the Constitution. Like, people can just like him and say, we want to make this guy president. Basically, that's it.
Of the Canadian electorate. And so that means it's actually incumbent on him to do exactly what he's doing, which is to call an election, but also not to be parading around the world, let's say, especially in places like Europe, acting as if he is Prime Minister with a mandate. Now, he's done a fair bit of that in the last couple of weeks, and we want to keep that in mind. And we also want to keep in mind the fact that the election is very likely to be of incredibly short duration, because there's a reason for that too. Okay, so currently as Prime Minister.
Oh, wait, the U.S. presidency, though, there's a minimum age. Like, there's a requirement for the age. And I thought in the Constitution somewhere they said you had to have been in the military, but I guess Trump got around that somehow. I don't know if he was the first president to get around that. I kind of remember that being an issue. But there are some provisions, like you have to be over a certain age to be the president, I think. There's ageism in there.
That's obviously somewhat impressive. He got a bachelor's degree from Harvard in 1988 and developed an interest in economics at that
I
point.
think they said Barack Obama was the youngest president. The youngest elected president, as well as the first, you know, person of color, obviously. So
Then he went to the University of Oxford. So these are major league educational institutions. And back in the late 80s and the early 90s, they were still highly credible institutions, I would say. So he was at Harvard in 1988. I was teaching there from 92 to 96. My experience at Harvard was stellar. I thought it was an absolutely remarkable institution. So again,
well, that's good to hear, Jordan. Okay, so look at the time, man. I really gotta be getting on. But much love to everybody. Be well, be kind, and stay trusty. And we'll see you at another time. All right.